Everyone is kind of, screaming their answers out. They come up to the microphone. This is the opportunity to kind of come up to the microphone. So please enter your your question in the Q&A box. And then also note that as you enter your question, you should see a little thumbs up button as an option. So if you agree with that question, or if you think that is an important question that you want to see answered, just click on the plus, because what that will allow us to do is prioritize the questions by their popularity, right? So that's kind of how we're trying to simulate who gets to the microphone to ask the question. So we will also be spotlighting, if you will, be prioritizing the questions that are coming out of our rooms that are requiring interpretation. So we'll be hearing those fed to the panelists. And when we get to the Q&A, I will repeat these instructions. So I think with that, Dr. O, we can go ahead and get started.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Karina nicely went over the features of our presentation tonight so that you can participate. We do want everybody to have the opportunity to speak their truth and speak it nicely. That said, I do want to welcome you to the Community Open House of Phase 2 Southeast Guiding Coalition process. I want to especially extend our warmest welcome to our Southeast Guiding Coalition members, our partners, our board of directors, and our community at large. We also want to welcome our panelists who will be responding to questions from the forum tonight. Tonight, we will hear acknowledgements and speak to PPS goals. We will also share our process and timeline. We'll listen to presentations on scenarios A, B, and C. We will take questions and provide as many answers as possible. And if we can't provide answers on the spot, we'll definitely get the answers to you. And we'll conclude this evening by sharing our next steps. Next slide, please. Tonight, what we're going to be doing is also looking at the open house program as an opportunity to hear directly about PPS Southeast enrollment and program balancing process. And we'll connect it with Southeast Guiding Coalition members and ask clarifying questions. Next slide, please. That said, as usual, we'll begin with our land acknowledgement. At PPS, we strive to strengthen our relationships with the Native community and Native nations. A symbol of this commitment is the land acknowledgement. These statements bring visibility to the First Peoples of our collective home. This statement is meant to provide information and context while also encouraging all of us to reflect on our current day relationship with Native people and Native experiences. We acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional land of the Chinook, Clackamas, Kalapuya, Multnomah, Wasco, Cathlamet, Tualatin, and Malala peoples. We also know that many other tribes made their homes along the Columbia and Willamette rivers. We honor their history and acknowledge the sacrifices they made. Let us also acknowledge the robust present-day federally recognized tribes of this area, the Grand Ronde, the Siletz, and the Cowlitz. In addition, I would like to acknowledge the Chinook Nation, who has been seeking federal recognition for many years. The urban Indian community is made up of tribal diversity that originates from around the country, representing 400 tribes. The urban Indian community has a vivid history made up of people whose journeys have brought them to Portland by ways of forced displacement or seeking more opportunities. Next slide, please. Today, these tribes and communities celebrate their heritage, showing resilience and tenacity that will be greatly admired by their ancestors. Within Portland Public Schools, today we serve students and families representing more than 150 different tribal nations within our education system. It is our obligation to teach accurate information, past and present, about the impact of colonization on our students, all students today, and make visible the multitude of Native families and many diverse ways Native communities and families are living in the present. We encourage every person to reflect on their own history, understand the history of colonization and genocide, and support Indigenous sovereignty, priorities, and actions. This acknowledgement is one step that can take to improve our support of Indigenous communities in the area. In addition to acknowledging the land and those that have been here since time began, we must also remember our stolen siblings from Africa, whose labor built the vast wealth of this country. These two communities and the atrocities committed against them are intrinsically intertwined due to our existence within a white supremacist world. Everything we have is due to stolen land and stolen labor, and every system and institution that impacts our lives is built upon this legacy. It is our job to speak that truth into spaces so that we can begin to heal. Next slide, please. That said, I'd like to hand the baton over to Claire Hertz.
Thank you, Dr. O. Good evening, I'm Claire Hertz, the Deputy Superintendent for Portland Public Schools. The Southeast Guiding Coalition completed phase 1 about a year ago in preparation of the opening of Kellogg Middle School this past fall. We are now in phase 2 in the Southeast and will continue future processes, especially for our high schools in 2022. Next slide, please. Our district goal is for every student to have a robust academic experience in every school. Our board is focused on having a comprehensive middle school experience available for all 6th through 8th students. As we convert to middle schools in the Southeast, we have a minimum of 500 students for a middle school. The phase 2 charge from the board is to convert Harrison Park to a middle school and to relocate Harrison Park's K-5 students and to increase enrollment in Lane Middle School. Next slide, please. As staff, we have established the Southeast Guiding Coalition with parent and community representatives from programs in 21 schools in the region. We have created 3 draft proposals. Next slide, please. Our parameters for the proposals include a preferred middle school enrollment above 500 students, a preferred enrollment for elementary schools above 270 students, preferred classroom use at 80% of the capacity of the school, and avoid moving boundaries across major arterial streets where possible. Next slide, please. Our instructional leaders have established these parameters, which are supported by our board. A is whole school K-5 DLI is preferred, but balanced co-location is acceptable. So that is for our dual language immersion programs. And no single strand neighborhood programs on co-located campuses. So what we're saying there is that when you have just for a neighborhood program, 1 kindergarten class or 1 first grade class, it doesn't make for a robust program in a neighborhood program. So when you have more than 1 program in a school, you'll want to make sure that on the neighborhood programs, we have at least 2 strands at each grade level. We're wanting to avoid having more than 1 dual language immersion program at a middle school, really looking at the possibility of keeping that to just 1. And then creative science will remain in the Southeast as a K-8 school, and considering partner school sites that have initial space for both a neighborhood program and creative science. We have also, by the request of the Southeast Guiding Coalition members, provided information that if we were to take creative science and make it a K-5 school, and what that data would look like if we move the 6-8 in to share a comprehensive middle school site for the 6th through 8th school, 8th graders at creative science. So that is a supplemental information only on that. Next slide, please. And now we're going to go over the proposed scenarios, and I'm going to turn it over to Jed Roberts from Flow Analytics.
Thank you very much, Claire. So yes, I'm Jed Roberts, a senior GIS analyst with Flow Analytics. We are the technical contractor that is assisting the district with enrollment mapping and modeling. And so I'm going to walk you through the elements of the draft proposals that have been considered so far by the Southeast Guiding Coalition. Each draft proposal is built around contrasting approaches that address the programmatic guidelines that you just saw that were set forth by the district. After setting the locations of the dual language immersion and focus program, we then redraw attendance areas to produce the enrollment estimates that show how well we're meeting our modeling drivers, specifically for Black and Native students, English language learners, and of course for all students in the region. We have 3 draft proposals so far, and I'm going to start with a comparison of their approach to addressing the board's charge. So next slide, please. So first we'll look at the conversion of Harrison Park from a K-8 school to a comprehensive middle school. And you see in all 3 proposals, the neighborhood K-5 students who are currently at Harrison Park are assigned to the Clark building. And so as a result, Creative Science School does need a new location in these proposals. Next slide, please. So Creative Science is relocated to a different location in each of the proposals. In Proposal A, it moves to Woodstock. In Proposal B, it moves to Arleta. And in Proposal C, it moves to Bridger. These 3 schools were identified because they have the most space to meet the district's desire for a near-term implementation that allows for Creative Science School to join the neighborhood students who are already at that school. So in the case of Proposal A and Proposal C, that relocation coincides with the movement of the dual language immersion programs that are at Woodstock and at Bridger to other schools in the region as part of the goals for dual language immersion programming. So after identifying each school, we go on to model for the expected long-term implementation of a school that will enroll its students from both the neighborhood attendance area and through lottery. And so this would be similar to enrollment policies that we see for Sunnyside Environmental and Buckman Arts in Southeast. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of words on this slide here. Let me see if I can break it down for you. So this is our consideration for DLI programming. And for dual language immersion programs, we looked at 3 different approaches. In Proposal A, the focus is on creating whole school dual language immersion locations for Spanish and Chinese in locations that are nearest native speakers of those languages. So at the K-5 level, we see Spanish consolidated at Lent and Chinese consolidated at Bridger. Both of these lottery schools then go on to feed the new Harrison Park Middle School. In Proposal B, the focus is on creating whole school dual language immersion locations, again for Spanish and Chinese, in locations where those lottery programs already exist, as well as create a neighborhood-based whole school at Lent. And so at the K-5 level, we see Spanish consolidated at Bridger and Chinese consolidated at Woodstock. The Chinese program, the lottery program at Woodstock would feed to Lane Middle School, and the Bridger Spanish lottery program would feed to Harrison Park Middle School. And then the Lent Spanish neighborhood program would continue to feed to Kellogg Middle School. And then finally, Proposal C, the focus is on continuing co-location options for both Spanish and Chinese. And at the K-5 level, we see the Bridger Spanish program with its 2 classrooms per grade being split to join existing single classroom programs at Atkinson and Lent. And so the Atkinson Spanish program would feed to Kellogg Middle School along with its co-located neighborhood program. And the Lent Spanish program would feed to Harrison Park along with its co-located neighborhood program. And then I just note the Woodstock Chinese program would stay as is and continue to feed to Hosford Middle School. Next slide. And so after setting the dual language immersion and creative science school locations, in Proposal A and Proposal B, the focus is to draw attendance area boundaries that maximize the number of schools that meet our minimum enrollment targets. And you saw 270 for elementary and 500 for middle school. When we do this, it sometimes resulted in boundaries that were not especially compact. In Proposal C, in contrast, the focus was to draw attendance area boundaries that prioritize safe routes to school by limiting the crossing of major roads. And in some cases, this made it impossible to meet our enrollment targets. Next slide. So this is a cover slide for draft Proposal A, which includes a written description of the proposal and a summary of the major grade reconfiguration and enrollment policy changes. And so these summaries and other resources are available for each of the draft proposals on the district's enrollment and program balancing page, which is probably how you found the link to this webinar, and through the online open house website that's also linked from the district's enrollment and program balancing page. So I'm just gonna read through the scenario summary here and just point out some of the reconfiguration and the policy changes here for draft Proposal A. So starting with middle school, Harrison Park does become the regional hub for Spanish and Chinese DLI programs and boosts neighborhood enrollment through some attendance area expansion. Similarly with Lane, its enrollment is boosted through attendance area expansion. At the elementary school level, again, Bridger and Lent become those regional hubs for Chinese and Spanish DLI respectively. Clark becomes the K-5 school for Harrison Park students, and attendance areas are adjusted to accommodate the dispersal of the Bridger and Lent neighborhood programs and to boost enrollment for schools that are no longer co-located with dual language immersion. And then draft Proposal A again is the proposal where Creative Sciences moved to partner with the Woodstock neighborhood program that exists. Next slide, please. And so this is a graphic that is also available through the links that I mentioned that shows the feeder patterns for draft Proposal A. And I would first just point out the, I'm getting somebody's
feedback.
vocal.
Yeah. Oh.
I think somebody's got the mute button. All right, thank you. So I would just point folks to the key in the middle here that shows these different colors. And the main thing I want to point out right here is that in the orange color, you see the neighborhood schools that are now assigned to a new middle school, a different middle school. You see also the location of Creative Science, and you see immersion programs in red that are now assigned to a new middle school. And so in this case, Atkinson is, as a neighborhood school, moving to the Hosford feeder program. We have Vestal moving to the Mount Tabor feeder area. And then we see some other feeder changes to do with the dual language immersion consolidation. And with that, I'm gonna kick it back to Karina, and we're gonna do a little bit of back and forth on a few of these slides and do some polls.
Thank you. So before we advance to the next slide, which will be our poll questions, one of the questions or a series of questions that we're seeing in the chat are about specific boundary lines and how their children will be impacted. We will make sure that all of the ideas that we hear tonight will be seen by the full Southeast Guiding Coalition. And as the Southeast Guiding Coalition starts to narrow down what proposal they're going to move forward, we will address all of those specific boundary line issues about, crossing major streets and making the adjustments about little islands to the greatest extent possible. So with that, one of the things we wanted to do tonight, first of all, I want to remind you, thank you all for using the Q&A and for using the up button. We are starting to see questions for the Q&A portion of the program kind of trickling up. I know some of these that are more technical in nature are being answered directly by instructional staff from the school district. Know that with as many people as we anticipated having here tonight, it's the cleanest way for us to be able to ensure that folks are getting the opportunity to ask all of their questions as best we can. So with that, Marnie, will you move us to the next slide, please? And Nathan is going to start a poll. So one of the things that we wanted to be able to ask you all tonight, so you should see a poll starting fairly quickly here. And Nathan, let me know if there are any issues beginning that poll. There we go. All right, so you all should see the question that is, what are the most important or positive attributes of Proposal A? Please consider the impacts of students who have been most affected by inequities in the Southeast region. So for you, is it opening Harrison Park with neighborhood students, as well as Spanish and Chinese immersion students, right, as a middle school? Any one of those. So if any of these programs are the most important to you, you can select up to 2. So this will be multiple choice. And we will let this run for about a minute to see how many responses we get. And then we will close it and give you the response. Oh, I'm hearing some feedback. Nathan, can you manage feedback if you can, please? Okay. Yes, again, you should be able to resize your polling window if you can't see all the way through to the bottom. So you should be able to drag that, the poll window that pulled up on your screen, so that way you should be able to see that. Okay, it looks like we're pretty stagnant. We'll give it maybe another 15 seconds. Okay, it looks like we've pretty much reached. Oh, now we're getting a flurry here. All right, Nathan, why don't you go ahead and close it? We can see what the results are. And go ahead and share the results. Okay, so what you can see is for the majority of folks, allowing as many students as possible to attend schools and programs closest to their homes, while avoiding crossing major roadways is the primary concern. And then the second is making boundary and program changes to ensure that, that the elementary schools and the middle schools are appropriately sized to achieve the greatest access to resources. So thank you for that. Okay. Wonderful. All right, Jed. So I'm going to let you proceed with draft proposal B. And I think the other thing that I'm not sure if you indicated, Jed, before we started, is it is not the district's intention to move forward with any of these 3 plans exactly as they are created, but rather talk about what are the positive attributes, the more concerning attributes of any of them, such that we can, with the Southeast Guiding Coalition, create a proposal that tries to pull the best ideas from all of these proposals and any other ones that we come up with in community, and tries to limit to the greatest extent possible any drawbacks to those proposals.
Perfect. Thank you, Karina.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll go to the next slide. Thanks. All right, just to highlight draft proposal B, and again, this is the cover slide for the summary that is available on the Enrollment and Program Balancing website. But just to highlight here, starting with the middle schools. So Harrison Park will join Kellogg in hosting Spanish DLI. Lane becomes the regional hub for Chinese DLI. And both Harrison Park and Lane expand their attendance areas to further boost enrollment at those schools. At the elementary level, Bridger and Woodstock become regional hubs for Spanish and Chinese DLI, again, respectively. Lent becomes a whole school Spanish DLI neighborhood enrolled program. Clark becomes the neighborhood K-5 school for the Harrison Park students. And the attendance areas are adjusted to, again, accommodate the dispersal of neighborhood programs, in this case, Bridger and Woodstock, and to boost enrollment for those schools that no longer have the co-located dual language immersion. And in this scenario, in this proposal, rather, the creative science program is moved to Arleta to merge with that existing neighborhood program. And then move to the next slide here, just to show again the feeder pattern graphic, pointing out that we have Creston neighborhood moving into the Hosford feeder pattern, and that we also have Vestal making a move from the Rosaway Heights feeder pattern into Harrison Park. And then you see the other changes there denoted by the colors in the key in the middle. And with that, I think we're ready for our next poll on Proposal B.
Okay, so you all should be seeing Proposal B polling exercise. So again, what are the most positive attributes of Proposal B? If you could select up to 2 of these. So yeah, and again, try and consider to the greatest extent possible the impacts on students who have been most affected by inequities in the Southeast region, both currently and historically. And we'll give it just another maybe 15 seconds, so get your last minute answers in if you can. Okay, looks like we've kind of reached the point where we aren't seeing many more new answers come in. Nathan, so will you end the poll and share it for us, please? So as you can see, again, very similar to the Proposal C or Proposal A responses, the majority is again trying to maintain as many students as possible to proximity, within proximity to their homes. And then also looking at maintaining the resources or aligning resources with enrollment. And the first 3, so opening Harrison Park with neighborhood students in Chinese immersion, enrollment at Lane through neighborhood growth, and creating whole dual language and whole neighborhood schools were kind of tied, if you will, for 3rd. So we're going to stop sharing and Jed is going to share with you the 3rd current draft proposal.
Thanks, Karina. Okay. Again, familiar looking slide now, and I'm just going to read through the scenario summary here to highlight what's happening in draft proposal C. So at the middle school level, Harrison Park it does have a Chinese dual language immersion program that is right now matriculating up to the middle school grades. It would retain that and also take on a share of the Spanish dual language immersion at the middle school level. In this proposal, again, Harrison Park is boosting enrollment through an attendance area expansion, as is Lane, which is a similar theme that we've seen. For elementary school, again, Clark becomes the neighborhood K-5 school for Harrison Park. And in this proposal, that K-5 Chinese immersion program that's currently at Harrison Park does move along with the neighborhood program to the Clark building. Lent and Atkinson, as mentioned earlier, each would receive one of the strands of the two-strand Bridger Spanish GLI program. We would have a change in feeders here, and that Lent would feed to Harrison Park to help bolster enrollment there, and to also provide a path of Spanish GLI to that program. And Atkinson would also switch feeder patterns to feed Kellogg. And we see that Vestal moves into the Harrison Park and Lewis into the Lane feeder patterns. And then finally, Creative Science is moved to partner with the Bridger Neighborhood program in this proposal. And then we'll just move now to the feeder pattern graphic. That's the next slide. Right, so I'm just gonna again point out that we have Atkinson moving to the Kellogg feeder here. You see that Lent and Vestal are moving out of their current feeder pattern into the Harrison Park feeder. And then you see that we have Lewis moving out of the Selwood feeder pattern and into the Lane feeder. So those are the major changes that we see in draft proposal C. And with that, I'm going to give it back to Karina.
Yeah, this one does have slightly different polling questions just because the proposal was a little bit different, but you should be seeing a poll come up here. There we go. So in this case, again, still trying to figure out what are the most positive attributes of proposal C, but looking at different ways of opening Harrison Park, right, with neighborhood students, Spanish and Chinese immersion, and the potential to add a grade for Bridger and Creative Science. Then increasing enrollment at Lane just through neighborhood growth. So we'll give you all a minute to think about this. Okay, we're getting up there. We'll give it maybe another 15 seconds. Okay, Nathan, looks like we've slowed down. You want to go ahead and close the poll and share it, please? Okay, So again, not too surprisingly, allowing proximity to home still remains the largest proportion of positive attributes. In this case, maintaining co-located neighborhood dual language schools is a high percentage of favorable rating as well, which is 44%. And then followed strongly at almost 30% or a little over 25% about relocating creative science K-8 school to Bridger to allow for some Harrison Park families. So will you stop sharing? Yes. Okay. So thank you, everyone. So what we want to do tonight, Marnie, will you share the panel Q&A slide, please? So we can walk people through. I think most people are understanding that because of the size of folks that we have tonight, we're going to be using the Q&A. You all have been doing a great job of upvoting. And so we're going to start to answer some of those most popular questions here. I know that some of them have already been answered. Some of the technical ones have been answered, but I'm going to start with what I believe to be our most popular question, which is considering that Portland Public Schools has decided to postpone the implementation of this plan for another school year, it seems important to expand this process to the river. None of these programs or proposals impact Abernathy, Grout, Llewellyn, or Dunaway. Considering that, with the exception of Grout, these are the wealthiest, widest, and most crowded Southeast elementary schools, moving their boundaries to increase enrollment in Southeast schools further east will help with enrollment balancing. It's really difficult to understand why this isn't being considered. Deputy Superintendent Claire Hertz, I think, will be answering this for us.
Yes, thank you for asking the question. It's one that I've heard frequently, and I'm glad that we're getting an opportunity to share that response tonight. We have postponed the implementation of this plan due to the staffing shortage being experienced in the education profession. As some of you may be aware, we actually opened schools this past fall with about 150 open teaching positions. And we currently have about 40 open teaching positions. So while there is lots of opportunities for teachers, if you know someone that would love to come teach, please send them our way. It has been hard to staff our schools in a timely fashion. We have over 3,200 teachers in this district. When we move students, staff will need to move as well. It takes time to go through a staffing process of this magnitude. If we implement this fall, we would not be able to post our open teaching positions until June, which is much later than what we did last year and in previous years. And this doesn't allow enough time to hire teachers and be able to be ready for the first day of school. So as it takes a much longer process. That's why we're moving it into the implementation the following fall. At the same time, we have very overcrowded high schools, and our board is interested in relieving the overcrowding and is interested in beginning this process next. So going back and adding, we've been focused with, our board asked us in their charge to focus on those 3 specific goals that were mentioned earlier, increasing enrollment at Lane, opening Harrison Park as a middle school, and relocating Harrison Park K-5 students to another school. So they really focused us in so that we were working with, we put together the Guiding Coalition with 21 schools and their programs being represented. So we're following our board's charge to keep it at a smaller scope. Their initial reasoning for that was the impact during a pandemic and trying to minimize the amount of schools impacted and the number of families. And also just really, as we're looking at going to high schools as being the next priority for them, in having time to do that work starting soon in 2022.
Okay, we have another question, and it's kind of a two-parter about Lane. So the first part is, what is the root cause of low enrollment at Lane? Are neighborhood students requesting transfers due to lack of programs and services or other problems? If so, perhaps the solution might be allocating resources rather than Lewis students. So shall we have this one? And are we going with you, Claire, or to Judy?
I think I'm going to take it, Marty.
Oh, Margaret, thank you.
Hi, my name is Margaret Calvert. I'm a regional superintendent with Portland Public Schools, and I work with middle schools, high schools, and the multiple pathways to graduation. So there are a couple of things that we noticed about Lane. They have, when we look at the number of students that live in the current boundary in the neighborhood that are attending, it's at about the district average. So it's just about 70% of students are attending Lane that live in the neighborhood. It's similar, the district overall is at about 72%, so they're fairly close. Depending on the year, it's somewhere between 68 to 71 for Lane. So neighborhood students are attending, and what we're seeing then is that there's a boundary impact, right, of thinking about how do we expand the boundaries to increase the number of students. That's one part of it. I think the other piece that we're looking at when you look at the three proposals, right, are thinking about are there other programs that are there? And so this is where DLI also flows into the enrollment pieces. So as we look through, there's slightly different proposals with what happens at Lane with that. But the primary piece is as we were looking through, this is really where it's a combination of both program and then being a language program and also boundary.
So thank you. The second half of that is that Lane Middle School is currently ranked 208 out of 277 in the state. And what is the plan and how many resources will be committed to help improve performance and student teacher support at Lane before there is a significant influx in new students?
So I think that as we look across at the very beginning of our presentation tonight, I think that there are a couple of really big drivers for as we're looking at the second phase of the Southeast Guiding Coalition. One is that we want robust programming at every school, and we want both at the elementary and at the middle school. And that we know in order to have that happen, that we need middle school enrollment closer to 500 students. So that is part of the reason that we're looking at how do we bolster and support at Lane. As you do that and you grow program, right? So then the key is to be strategic about the investments that are going into the building to support students and bringing communities together. So I think it's a combination of pieces of recognizing that the size of the school is impacting the type of programming that is present, and that as we invest in the programming and expand, that we'll see that combination lead to performance. And part of what we're describing is for supports is we want the neighborhood programs and schools to be in high demand and connected to the communities. And so I think that is where we're looking at with Lane is making sure that we are supporting the community and also enrollment that will support the programming to again, lead to greater connections to the communities. It's somewhat of a cyclical process, but the investment comes with students as well.
Thank you, Margaret. Okay, then our next question, I believe, is for you, Deputy Superintendent Hertz. Will you be keeping the legacy policy in place due to children's mental health instability, along with many other factors at this time? And when will we know that this policy will stay in place?
So right now, the policy is in place for neighborhoods programs. So the legacy for students completing in their current school. It gets more difficult in terms of a program placement, in especially dual language immersion. It's very difficult to move part of a program to one school and leave the other part of the program in a different school. So it is really especially in place for the neighborhood program. So that's a board policy, and it would take board action to go outside of that board policy.
Anything else? Nope. Okay. Thank you. The next question, I believe, may be for you, Dr. Proctor. It's about DLA data. So we still have not seen data on why PPS feels whole school DLI are preferred. Whole school DLIs can lead to further segregation of BIPOC communities. It seems like Portland Public Schools is prejudiced against Proposal C. Why most of the parents prefer Proposal C?
The data was provided to the Southeast Guiding Coalition organizing group. So I am not aware that the rest of the participants have not received or seen the data, but the data does exist. So what the data does show, I could speak to it here, but what the data does show is that the students in the co-located dual language immersion schools are not performing at the same rate as students who are not in dual language immersion schools, particularly our EL population of students. So for example, if we looked at math performance, for example, in the non-DLI schools, you have students that are performing at a 56%, 54 or 52% rate of meeting the expectations, while in Spanish DLI, those numbers are 31 and 32%. In Mandarin, it's 34 and 45%. Japanese DLI is the exception, where students are performing at 79%. In Vietnamese is another exception for the inside area, where they're performing at 58, but compared to 45%, it's lower. And in the Russian DLI program, only 17% of students and also 33% of students are performing. So when you look at data compared to non-DLI schools, compared to our 24 DLI programs, of our 24 programs, 23 of them are co-located, that there are disparities in how students are performing overall. So the question is about data, and I just recommend that we share the data with the group entirely. And we could invite Dr. Adams, who is the Chief of Research, Assessment and Accountability, and who has actually provided the data to share the data with the group.
Thank you, Dr. Proctor. Okay. I believe our next most popular question, it says, so this is about high school impact. So how will the outcome of this process impact the upcoming high school conversations about adjustments relating to overcrowding? Under what timelines will the high school input be taken? And why haven't transportation audits been part of this process? So I'm going to send that to you, Margaret, I believe.
Yes, thank you for the question. So as Deputy Superintendent Hertz mentioned earlier, we will be embarking on a review of high school enrollment balancing successively after this process. So certainly decisions that are made in this process will inform the next process. The goal is not to do and then undo and then redo with decisions. So we're paying attention closely to the flow of students and thinking about how that will show up in high school programming. I think that for example, I think as we look at both enrollment patterns and then also location of programming, we'll look at both, similar to what we're doing here in this process. As Deputy Superintendent Hertz mentioned, we'll start this process in later in the spring of 2022. So and then it'll carry through into the next school year. I think there was a second part of that question too. So
there was, and that may be more for Deputy Superintendent Hertz. But why haven't transportation audits been part of this process?
So I guess I'm trying to understand the question, why haven't transportation audits been part of this process? And so I don't have enough information. If Karina, you understand what this is connected to, I'm just not sure.
I believe it was tied, or it was asked, I think, in the context of that same, I think, high school question. And so I think just trying to better understand what the transportation impacts are of these.
So in terms of high schools or in the Southeast for?
In the Southeast as a whole, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess I just don't have enough context, and I would, if someone would post more in the Q&A about that question, who asked that question, to help clarify, then I'd be happy to respond.
Thank you. So in the meantime, we will go to the next question, which may go back to you, Dr. Proctor. Or maybe it's actually to you, Deputy Superintendent Hertz. For the balancing of the principles, why does creative science get preferential treatment by staying K-8 over DLI programs?
Creative science was created by our board in a resolution that has based on a policy they have in place about educational programs, options for our for our families. And so just like we have multiple pathways to graduation in our high school levels, we also have option programs at our middle school level for students that may not be as successful in a comprehensive middle school. So it's important that we have options in place for families that choose a smaller experience for their middle school student. And I'm really wondering if this might be more of a Misha response about middle school programming and what's needed for middle school students, rather than more in the instructional realm. So it is an instructional program decision.
I mean, I think it is what you said, and that it was a resolution that was created by the board to have options for middle school students. And so with that, it's there's Da Vinci, there's, I believe it's Winter Haven. I actually don't have all the pathways memorized, but having options for students who aren't successful in comprehensive, and giving students and families choice.
Thank you, Misha. Okay, our next question is, both A and B have a greater impact on neighborhood programs than C, displacing 4 schools in A and 5 in B, not including schools who have increased enrollment due to displaced students, while C impacts Bridger and Harrison Park, not including boundary changes. What evidence is there that disrupting this many neighborhood programs and displacing this many kids from schools in the neighborhood will result in improved student outcomes and improved equity on resources across Southeast Portland? So I'm going to assume that this is a question for the teaching and learning side of the house. So I don't know if that is you, Dr. Proctor, or Dr. O, or Margaret, who is taking this one.
Repeat the heart of the question, please.
Sure, I sure will. So there's both A and B, proposals A and B have a greater impact on neighborhood programs than C. And then there's some specifics about that, right? While C impacts Bridger and Harrison Park. So what evidence is there that disrupting this many neighborhood programs and displacing this many kids from schools in their neighborhood will have resulted in greater student outcomes or improved student outcomes and improved equity of resources across Southeast Portland? Maybe Dr. O, from an elementary standpoint?
Well, what I would like to say is what we were charged with was to balance enrollment and programs. In the course of doing that, we realized that we do have to look at our DLI programs because they are imbalanced in many of our schools. So our attempt is to create an environment that will allow our schools to be even more successful, making sure that we provide the resources they need, we consolidate our student numbers and our services to our schools, and we ensure that we provide the appropriate professional development to students. So that's where we started from. We do know from research that DLI programs, when they're whole school, they do a lot better because there is the context of immersion, there's the support for teachers, and there is also resources that are focused and channeled. So that's the premise for trying to look at different options. Right now, we're not saying necessarily that a proposal A, B, or C is going to be the one panacea. What we're saying is, in light of what we know about DLI and in light of what we know about student achievement or student academic performance, here are the options that we think would work the best. Hence the input we are seeking from the Southeast Guiding Coalition and our community.
Dr. O, can I add one other piece?
Yes, please.
If I may, thank you. So, and I think we said it up front, and I just don't want to lose sight of this, but part of what we're looking at is some of the proposals highlight some of the tensions or trade-offs when you're prioritizing things. So, for example, when we did the polling, there was a question about, valuing being close to I'm trying to think of the actual language of the question, but one was don't cross major streets, right? Like to keep a compact boundary. And the other was to also have the elementaries and middle schools be appropriate size. So one of these things, as we go through, the different proposals are going to highlight some of these different values, and they'll show where the tension points are. And then it gives you a visual of kind of how that shows up in the Southeast boundaries, right? So across the region. So as you start to as we've noticed and look at, as you start to work through how do you try to elevate or prioritize one piece, it impacts and it cascades throughout the region. So part of what happens with these three proposals is they highlight some of what is the same when you think about some things and what is different. And we started with really thinking about what does each of the proposals bring to the fore as a positive. And so what you're highlighting is where some of the trade-offs are. So I think that that's just helpful to keep in mind as we're talking through the various scenarios.
And to add to what my colleagues are saying, when we have a scenario where there is a given charge and we have to look at options and opportunities, we then have to look at data and see what the data is telling us about the current programs as they are positioned within schools. Hence the conversation about whole school versus co-located, and understanding which students are impacted positively and negatively through those particular models. So I think there was a comment or question that spoke about whether or not we were partial in one way or another to either whole school or co-located models. And that's not the case. It's really just what the data is telling us. And if the data is telling us that students who are in non-DLI students are outperforming students within the DLI programs, then we are then charged, as a byproduct to examine deeply what's happening within the programs and take this as an opportunity to make a whole scale resolve and resolution so that we could better meet the needs of the students and better meet the needs of all students within the DLI program. The data does say very clearly, again, that the 24 schools with DLI programs underperform our schools that do not have DLI programs. There are some elements of DLI that have negative impacts as far as student outcomes, because in DLI, the focus is for biliteracy, which is high academic attainment in both English and in the partner language. And when we see evidence that that is not the case, we need to then examine what we need to do to make the program more effective for students. Now, this conversation is about boundary and enrollment, and that is how it was, I guess, charged or initiated. And regardless of the outcome that the Southeast Guiding Coalition decides for schools, we still have the charge to examine the programs and make sure that every student has equitable access to a high quality learning experience where they could be successful in whichever program it is that they are sitting in.
Thank you, Dr. Proctor. We're being reminded that there are translators working in all the rooms, and so we need to slow down a little bit between our answers. So I'll provide just a moment of breath so that way they can catch up to us. Okay, I believe the next question is for you, Deputy Superintendent Hertz. If the goal is 500 minimum students, I believe that's at the middle school level, why does Proposal C leave Selwood with 400 students and no ability to add an additional feeder due to geography?
So for question about 500 students, first of all, proposal A, B, and C are not final, and there are trade-offs being made in each proposal, and there isn't one yet that fits all the criteria that we've established in terms of the parameters. We're working within the constraints of what we have available to us, and there are, we will continue to refine through the Southeast Guiding Coalition and your input tonight and from the community. So we are taking the input we get tonight and then continue to change and modify proposals to make them better. We will most likely go down from 3 to take maybe some of the best components out of each of the proposals and try to put them together into finding the best proposal. So at this point, yes, Proposal C leaves Selwood at 400 kids, but we're not done fixing these proposals. We just need your input along the way as we continue to make improvements.
Thank you. Again, we'll give it a minute to let them catch up. I believe this next one is also for you, Claire. For proposals having kids cross 82nd, A and B mostly, would there be a safety plan in place for this road that has the highest number of pedestrian deaths in Portland each year?
So we do have students currently crossing 82nd, and we do have safe route to schools. We work with the city of Portland as well as with our transportation department to determine when we provide bus transportation and when we have other options of getting students there safely, whether it be bike or by foot or with the family. So yes, we will have safe routes to schools from the city working with us and making changes to our transportation routes to create that safety of transporting kids to and from school on a daily basis.
Thank you. Okay, this next one is about DLI. So why are Bridger's DLI strands being split instead of moving them together to another school? This is highly disruptive to the Bridger DLI program after dealing with over 10 years of disruption. Do you want to take that one, Claire, or should we maybe have Jed answer it?
Jed, go ahead, yes.
I'll go ahead and take a stab since Claire's been answering quite a few of the questions. So yeah, that split is a situation in which we're looking at the enrollment and utilization of the existing schools that have Spanish DLI, which are Atkinson and Lent, and they don't have the capacity to take on both of those strands and also have at least 2 strands of neighborhood program at those schools as well. So that's the reason in that particular proposal why that doesn't work out for bringing both strands to one of those locations.
Thank you. Jed?
Again, I would just remind that these proposals are preliminary draft scenarios, and these are the things that we're wanting to hear. That are the trade-offs that people can't live with. So bringing these forward is very helpful, and it helps us look at what are the priorities from our community. So these are great questions. Thank you.
Okay. This next one I'm going to assume goes to you, Claire. Can Portland Public Schools not provide Harrison Park K-5 a new building as was done for access? It seems unfair to inflict so much chaos on so many Southeast schools, especially now.
So the Harrison Park K-5 is a neighborhood program and is meant for students to be able to walk to school. The access program is a district-wide program that is transportation is provided for students to go from all over the district. So there's not really a comparison between the two. And I do hear that finding a home for Harrison Park K-5, we have centered our work around Harrison Park, especially because it has some of our largest underserved population in our district in that school. And so we really centered around our BIPOC families and our multilingual families that in really supporting them in finding a home that's walkable for the students, that's close enough for the students to still be able to walk to school. Many of the families don't have vehicles and would not be able to, they'd have to take public transit to pick up students from school if they got sick. And so it's just important for them to be in their local neighborhood.
Okay. This next question, again, giving a bit of a break for our translators. Okay. Next question is, how is this working to dismantle the white supremacist history of Portland by continuously shifting disenfranchised students to new schools while the perception is you're not touching predominantly white schools?
Claire, do you want me to start?
That would be great.
Okay. All right, so the Southeast Guiding Coalition process is really an attempt to balance enrollment and programs in Southeast. The goal eventually would be for the whole district to be balanced at some point. So yes, it does look as if we're not touching predominantly white schools at this point, but as we continue to move this process district-wide, at some point, other schools will be impacted as well. So in this scenario, for example, we have Selwood and Mount Tabor and other schools that are predominantly white impacted. Southeast just happens to be a very diverse, or probably the most diverse aspect or part of Portland. And that happens to be where we started the process.
Thank you, Dr. O.
Sure.
Okay, back to on the operational side. If safe routes to schools are impossible to support these maximization targets, have you considered renovating, expanding, building on existing buildings rather than moving kids around? And assume that one goes to you, Claire.
Yeah, so we have been given a charge by our board in what to accomplish in the Southeast in terms of enrollment and program balancing. And it did start with phase 1 opening of Kellogg, and then going on to really focusing on Harrison Park and Lane Middle Schools and finding a home for Harrison K-5 students once Harrison Park became a middle school. And so in terms of expanding and building on existing buildings, we have plenty of capacity in our schools right now to move students in order to fit in the facilities that we have and the capacity we have in our buildings right now. So we're really not out of facility space. We do have to balance our enrollment and our programs on a semi-regular basis. It's not, I think we probably won't be back to the Southeast for quite some time, but our next focus will be high school because that's where we have the most overcrowding now. So in terms of when trying to make sure that I'm answering your question,
It was tied specifically to the importance or the feasibility or lack thereof of safe routes to schools to support the 270 and the 500. Right. Right.
And so that it does, we are trying to keep people in their walking neighborhoods as much as possible. And the programs, of course, go outside of those, especially the DLI programs go outside of those neighborhood walking areas. But so I'm trying to connect the safe school routes to the maximum size targets. And I'm not sure I'm seeing the connection here.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This next question is specific to proposal C. I think, Jed, maybe you start because you can look at some of the numbers and then we can get maybe someone from the teaching and learning side of the house to support if there are questions that are best for them. But proposal C doesn't seem to address the under-enrolled elementary schools in Southeast. I'm concerned that it will leave room for one of these schools to be forced to close in the future.
Yeah, that's one of the trade-offs that we've heard folks talk about is if we really try to stay to really nice compact attendance areas and try not to cross those major arterials, we do run into a few cases where we're not able to get up to those minimum enrollments. So that's something that we'll be working with the Guiding Coalition to try and find where are those places that we could actually cross those major roads and it be okay to help us get to those enrollments that we'd like to see.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, did any of the people drawing up the proposal tour the spaces to visually assess the use of space? As an Arleta parent, I can attest to school activities being held in former supply closets. I'm curious if the square footage calculations actually reflect the space usage and what the plan is to double check that. Also, when talking about use of space, it seems preserving the student body would be an important consideration, as that's who's currently using that space. So maybe Deputy Superintendent Hertz, you can talk a little bit about kind of the coordination between
Sure.
the work of this group and the facilities group.
Yes. We have a facilities team, and we have actually done a full inventory of all of our schools across the district and have counted the number of classroom spaces, and we have created capacity charts for each one of our schools. And we did have a whole team go through each and every school and calculate space, count rooms, and track that in the very similar fashion throughout the whole district, so it was comparable from school to school. So we have a facilities team that has hired a firm that actually went through and did all of that work. And then we have taken that work, we have set aside classroom space for specifically for special education programs, preschool programs, specials at our elementary schools, such as music and PE, so that there is a comparable facility usage and space capacity calculation for each one of the schools in the Southeast.
Claire, if I might just add one other piece, I think we are, throughout this process, we've also engaged with principals that are currently in the buildings as well, and to share. There is sort of, how do you take a two-dimensional footprint of a school and then blow it into 3 dimensions when you put students in there and teachers and programs, and what does that look like? And so there is, the calculations, and then also there is the lived experience that we're hearing from principals as well.
And I think the goal was to keep the building utilization at 85%, 80% rather than 100, because as a former principal, I know functioning at 100% capacity, people are working out of closets. So I think setting that 80% makes it feasible for those schools.
So while that 80% is a goal in some of the proposals, there are several schools that'll be above the 80%. So I want to be clear on that. Just like we have all the parameters in place of what's best for all scenarios, but when we try to put them all together and make all of this work and meet all the requests from the Southeast Guiding Coalition of what they want, it isn't possible. So far, we haven't found the perfect proposal that meets all of that criteria. So there are some tight spaces in a couple of the proposals.
Okay, thank you. Take a pause here. Okay, the next question probably belongs on the teaching and learning side of the house, so maybe Margaret Nestor can address elementary and secondary respectively. But what is the logic behind these maximization targets, the 270 and the 500? They seem like arbitrary limits on students rather than logical premise.
Well, in order for us to create an environment for a middle school student to benefit from the experiences that the adolescent needs to be able to mature and to be able to experience or be prepared for careers of the future, it is essential for us to have numbers that will allow us to provide the electives in addition to core content for those students. For us to be able to do that, we do need to at least have a minimum target number. The minimum target number for middle school was determined based on that. How many electives can we provide, and what's the minimum reasonable number of electives that a middle schooler should at least be able to enjoy or have access to? We also looked in that context about providing electives in the form of a wheel so that students can every 6 weeks have a different experience that will give them some exposure to additional extended practices around content and career experiences. So that's the reason for the middle school. The elementary school is also functioning along the same context. An elementary school can be too small for us to have or to be able to provide academic programs that are robust and supportive of student learning. So what will it take for us to have adequate PLCs, strong teacher collaboration experiences, great professional development experiences, and an environment that is nurturing, caters to the needs of the student. So that's how we arrived at 270. It's just a reasonable number to allow us to provide the academic content, supports, and experiences for all our kids. If we exceed it, great. If we add that number, awesome. But anything smaller would probably be a real challenge for us in terms of providing adequate support for kids.
Thank you, Dr. O. Okay. Next question is a clarification on creative science. So is creative science co-locating with schools, or the neighborhood school that CSS moves to is being absorbed by CSS? Those are two different things. I believe, Misha, you were taking this one.
Yeah, CSS would be school-wide at Bridger, and it would include the neighborhood students. And so there wouldn't be a neighborhood strand or a focus strand in terms of different instruction. The instruction would all be through the constructivist lens.
Thank you. Okay, I also want to take a pause to let you all know that we know that there are, I believe, over 330 separate comments and questions so far that have been entered into the Q&A, regardless of whether or not they've been upvoted or not. All of the Q&A will be shared publicly after this event. So even if your question did not get upvoted, we will still put that publicly, share that publicly as part of the Q&A. Okay. So question 19, please clarify that high school assignments are not made yet. In scenario C, all of Spanish DLI would attend Harrison Park and then McDaniel. It is inevitable, or it is equitable, is it equitable to have students in the Lent neighborhood travel all the way to McDaniel versus going to a closer in high school, such as Franklin? I believe that is you, Margaret.
Yep, thanks so much. I appreciate the question. This is exactly the type of thing that we're looking at, and when we're saying that this is going to be, that this decision-making process will inform the next, right? So what we are recognizing at the high school is that some of our high schools have enrollment that is closer to 2,000, and some is closer to 1,200 or 1,300. Sorry, I apologize. I'm at the BSE and my lights went out. So I'll get it back. I have to go back out and get it back on. So I'll do that after I answer the question. So part of what we're going to look at when we look at the high schools is where are we seeing enrollment balance? Where are we seeing the enrollment moves that we'll have to make to try to smooth enrollment over the 9 comprehensive high schools and the 2 focus high schools. So I think that part of what that will be the next phase. And you're highlighting a couple of the things. One is around dual language immersion programs and how will those feeder patterns be established, and then also around proximity. So very similar to the questions we're asking now, except that a high school catchment tends to be much bigger than for an elementary or middle school, for example. So that will be part of the next phase, and the decisions and what we're looking at here should inform what that looks like. I think part of the question and what we'll have to look at is if we start to see a feeder pattern, we don't want to do and then undo a location, right, of various things, whether it's a program feeder pattern or a neighborhood sort of feeder pattern. So that will be part of the decisions that will be made successively. And then in the next, it'll be informed by the decisions that are made, in the coming months for this part. The difference will be that it'll be citywide, right? Like when we look at the high school system, we'll be looking across the city, and this part of the city will inform some of those decisions.
Thank you, Margaret. Okay. Next question, I believe, is for you, Claire. Has Title I loss been factored into these configurations?
Title I is a federal grant program that provides extra funding to schools that have a higher poverty rate. So the question would be, have we looked at poverty as we're looking at changing the makeup of schools? And we are looking at the poverty data of each scenario and each school as we are looking at each scenario. It's something that certainly that is a good question that we should be stating and making very clear to the Southeast Guiding Coalition if any of these current scenarios have an impact of a Title I loss of funding. But understand that the Title I threshold does get moved over time and is changed based on the demographics of our whole district. And so while we could make, we could certainly know what the current title percentage is for qualification, that isn't necessarily a permanent rate. And so but something that we should certainly consider as we're looking at our proposals.
Thank you, Claire. I think this next one might be you as well in terms of the question, but I want to give the interpreters a moment. Okay, there's a long lead in and then the question. There's a sense of urgency, which we know is rooted in white supremacist culture, that feels wrong here. There is a continued lack of language justice with fully translated materials still not available as of tonight. Critical perspectives are missing from these proposals as written and presented, e.g. trauma-informed potential impact assessments from pediatric mental health experts and input from a broad spectrum of certified and classified staff, including paraprofessionals and support staff. Where there are concentrations of BIPOC personnel. BIPOC families, including my own, feel a deep sense of unfairness inherent in the dynamic of dividing communities against each other to compete for a fabricated scarcity of resources and options, when in fact we know there are other pathways involving other schools as others describe. Can the district explicitly share how we can adjust timelines? What room is there to change course and slow down changes with major implications during such a challenging time?
Thank you for the question. We have been working in the Southeast. This is our second year working on boundary changes here. We have certainly modified the timeline multiple times, especially due to the challenging time of being in a pandemic. And that's how we ended up with a phase 1 and a phase 2. We have also started and stopped at different times based on the needs of in addressing the pandemic. We also are adding meetings to this phase 2 in order to give the Southeast Guiding Coalition the time that they need to complete the process. So while I do appreciate that there is a sense of urgency to finish, there is also, we're trying to meet the needs of the Guiding Coalition and the community in bringing this to closure. Our board has asked us to do this work, and they have limited the scope in order to make it a smaller impact on the Southeast region.
Thank you. Okay, this next question has 2 parts. So the first part is, I'm curious why these proposals continue to not address the fact that unenrollment has been caused by lottery schools pulling students from neighborhood boundaries. Have you reviewed these proposals for typical retainment percentages at these schools? I don't know if that's a combination of Jed and potentially Claire?
Or Judy.
Or Judy. We can, yes.
Jed, do you want to talk about
Yeah.
the payment percentages? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we are absolutely taking a look at the capture rates for the different programs within their attendance areas. So that helps us understand the sizing of different attendance areas in the proposals that we've got. So that is something that is built into the modeling for us to get a sense of what the enrollment estimates will be.
Okay, and then the second part of that is there any data or support for why under-enrolled schools are under-enrolled currently? I would be interested in understanding if some under-enrolled neighborhoods have fewer children in them because young families can't afford to live in those neighborhoods.
Yeah, so I was actually just drafting up a written response to Adrienne there. So the enrollment trends in the district right now, they really do depend on the different grade levels. And right now we're seeing actually enrollment increases at the high school level. We're seeing pretty flat enrollment at the middle school level. And we're seeing enrollment loss at the elementary school level. And we were already seeing that trend before the pandemic hit. And as we look at the Southeast region, that's a pretty widespread trend for the K-5 level. It's not necessarily just the schools that we see that are currently under-enrolled, but we do see that those schools will continue to, over time, based on projections, lose enrollment. And that is something that we're kind of fighting against as we're trying to build out those attendance areas that do get to those minimum enrollments that we're trying to seek. We are looking at the 2025 5-year out projection when we're trying to hit those enrollment minimums.
Thank you, Jed. I think you could stay on because this next one I think is for you as well. So these projections are based on 2019-2020 pre-pandemic data. So they do not reflect losses that all urban cities are facing. We know that some of these students are not coming back based on their movement out of state. Can we have updated numbers with an assumption that some, maybe a third or half of students will not be returning? Will PPS guarantee that students at lower income Title I middle schools will have a robust experience by mandating a base of electives offered when they do not meet the minimum enrollment of 500 students?
Yeah, so yeah, I'll take a crack at the first part there. And in the demographer business, we're very interested in knowing how many students are actually going to remain out of the system, and we just don't know that right now. It's part of the conversation that we have with the Guiding Coalition as we're advising them that we need to plan for perhaps these students not coming back and just making sure that we're not overutilizing schools, right, in the long term by assuming they don't show up when they do, or on the flip side, not planning for smaller schools. So it's a balancing act when we just don't have that crystal ball to tell us how many kids are going to come back.
Thank you. I think the second part of this is, the commitment to have robust experiences at the middle school level. And so maybe Misha, you can speak to that about what is the district's plan to ensure that if you start to see some decreasing enrollment because of either the pandemic or various other forces, would schools that don't meet the minimum enrollment still have the opportunity to have a robust base of electives offered?
Yeah, I think schools that don't meet the minimum required can still offer a robust electives and courses. It just makes it more difficult. It impacts staffing. It impacts the ability to meet with, move students around and schedules. So when you have an ideal number, it helps create the conditions to allow students to engage in that robust curriculum. I don't know if Margaret wants to add anything to that. Sorry to hand it over.
No, I think that part of what ends up happening when we look at, as we started to look at the southeast quadrant of the city and looking at K-8, and part this was really initiated by looking at some redesign of K-8 and reconfiguring school feeder patterns into K-5 in middle schools to build out, as Misha said, robust academic programming at the middle grades. And so again, Dr. O speaks to this very eloquently around in the middle grades. What we want to do is help students find identity, passion, and connection to academic success. And so that's part of what we're looking at, is making sure that the schools are large enough to provide that robust programming, and then also that supports what students can choose from, but then also allows staff the professional learning and sort of partner teachers to help support students. So it's a combination of size that both helps with student choice and then also with teacher collaboration. So Dr. O, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that. But.
Yes, I was just going to say at the middle school level, what we try to do is we try to provide opportunities for our students to create their own self-identity. They are beginning to come into their own nature, getting to know what they like, what they don't like, plan for their future, have an idea of careers that they want to pursue, and so many things. So at this stage where the interest is still very high, as educators, our number one priority is to provide those experiences that nurture and support our students as they navigate the middle grades. So if you have a middle school that's got the right numbers, you're able to do more, just like Nisha said. If you have a middle school that doesn't have as many students, then it is very, very difficult to provide the same quality experiences across the board. Now, especially that we are beginning to look at CTE and look at careers of the future and try to at least sort of second guess what might be in the horizon, it is incredibly important for us to make sure that our students enjoy a very, very deep, healthy experience along all kinds of things that they have to do.
Thank you, Dr. O. Okay, this next one is kind of a revisit to what I think is the most frequent category of questions, which is, and I believe this one will go to you, Deputy Superintendent Hertz. Currently and historically, you are not impacting the wealthiest and widest schools in the Southeast District. Can you speak to why those schools were not considered for rebalancing?
So our Southeast Guiding Coalition has been given a charge by our board of directors. And in that charge, they chose to focus on our needy schools that needed, they wanted to make sure that we had a comprehensive middle school available for our 6th or 8th grade students out in the Southeast. So they chose 3 components to bring forward. One is to open Harrison Park as a middle school, so that region has a middle school program. And so then that meant a K-5 Harrison Park students needed to have a neighborhood school, and to increase the Lane Middle School enrollment. And in doing that, they asked us to limit the process to keeping it in a smaller component of Southeast rather than going from the river to the outer east boundaries of the district. They believed that during a pandemic, it wasn't the time to really work on the whole region and to focus on where we had the most need. Lane Middle School is about it currently has the access program there, and those students will be moving to bring the access program back together that had been split into 2 schools in a district-wide program. So the board had made a commitment to the access community to bring those students back together, and they are doing that. And then that makes Lane a very small school again. So we would need to, that was why Lane was made as a priority, and then Harrison Park is made as a priority because they want a comprehensive middle school available for all middle school students in the Southeast.
Thank you, Claire. Okay. When you create a fourth proposal from the best of the current three, what will be the community review process and how will parents have input? Maybe Shanice, I believe that you are on. If you wanted to handle this one. Oh, I don't know if Shanice is on. Oh, there you are.
Hi, can you all hear me?
I can.
Great. And so we have a dedicated process to make sure families are able to provide input on this process. And this is important for us to be able to make updates and revisions to the proposals. And so I know we'll have a slide that will go over specific dates and next steps. But we have a few key ways that we're collecting input from community. Schools are gathering input in addition to dedicated spaces that are for Black, Indigenous, and people of color and multilingual communities. And we are making sure that we collect their priorities in more than one way to be able to illustrate that to the greater community as a result of the process. So.
Yeah, so maybe talk about kind of the three levels, right? So we have specific conversations happening in school communities being led by either principals or in some cases a parent organization in conjunction with the school district. There are focus groups that are happening with particular affinity groups, whether it be language-based or, you know, again, looking at both teachers and paraprofessionals. And then there is this open house. So those are kind of the three levels that were happening. They're happening here, and they will happen again once we get a more refined plan or another plan that will that we will take back out to the community. Is that fair to say, Shanice?
Yes, Karina, yes.
Okay. Okay, so 26, as a parent of a 7th grader, will middle school students in their current school be able to complete their current term and graduate from the school they started in? My understanding is that this is the case, but would like it confirmed tonight or have an explanation of why that will not be the case. Thank you. Claire, maybe this is one for you in terms of grandfathering. Mm-hmm.
It is. So because they're in 7th grade, they would finish in 8th grade at their current school. So that would be, they'd complete this year, and then they'd have one more year. We're not implementing the Southeast Guiding Coalition process until the fall of 23. And I believe that a 7th grader this year would be in high school at that point.
Thank you. Okay. A staffing process of this magnitude, have you polled the DLI teachers? They don't want to be isolated from neighborhood programs. What are the polling results from actual teachers? How can we alleviate the staffing shortage if we make the classroom situation less desirable?
So we have a focus group for our staff that is part of this process, and we're meeting with them tomorrow afternoon. And so we will be gathering input from our teachers and as well as our paraeducators. They've all been invited to join us in that session tomorrow. And then I guess about how can we alleviate the staffing shortage if we make the classroom situation less desirable? So in some of our proposals, we are, there are co-located programs as well as whole school DLI. So I'm not sure that we're down to just looking at whole school DLI programs. We're looking at both. So at this point, it isn't, a decision hasn't been made in that area. And certainly we're gathering the teachers' input on what's important to them and for their students.
Okay. When we signed up our students for the DLI program, we were asked to commit to the full 13-year program. By changing our boundaries across many major streets also impacts our ability to attend. So I would consider that agreement moot. Or do you have plans to mitigate these hardships? I think this is about, again, getting folks to cross major boundaries. So maybe we can talk about the next phase or the refinement to look at what those boundaries are. Claire?
So right now, we have, in Proposal C in particular, we have taken the input from the Southeast Guiding Coalition, and Jed, you could probably describe this better than I could, to avoid crossing major streets. And by doing that, Jed, do you want to talk about how you used major arteries for designing the Proposal C with the Southeast Guiding Coalition recommendation?
Yeah, so we actually have a collaboration workspace that we use, interactive space that folks are allowed to drop little notes on the maps for the existing proposals. And what we did is we went and looked at those comments to help guide us in the locations that folks wanted to see us make more compact boundaries. And so at this point, we haven't been able to workshop that in detail with the Guiding Coalition. And when the programmatic pieces are in place, we're really looking forward to finessing that a little bit more with our local experts.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to give you one more question here. This is, again, back to DLI. What is the thinking of moving Spanish DLI out of Kellogg? The decision to put Spanish DLI at Kellogg went through a lengthy process during phase 1, and it's less than 12 months old. Kellogg was staffed based on the phase 1 decisions. It seems insensitive to the staff, disruptive to educational continuity, and fiscally irresponsible to change direction on programming at Kellogg after such an investment.
Again, I believe this is Jed, and part of the criterion Proposal C has that movement. Could you talk a little bit about the trade-offs that were in Proposal C that had Spanish DLI moving out of Kellogg?
Yeah, that has to do with maintaining feeder patterns. So as we see the schools that are whole school DLI consolidating into K-5 locations like at Lent or Bridger or other locations that we've seen, there's sometimes then being assigned to their nearest middle school or a different middle school than before. So it's really starting at the K-5 level, and then it does drive up to, where that feeder pattern would go to the middle school level. So it's about that co-location, or sorry, the whole school model there that really drives that.
And if I could just add, again, these three proposals highlight different trade-offs, right? And so as we go through and try to lay out, what are the impacts of different decisions, then they are revealing themselves. So in one of the proposals, Spanish CLI is moved out of Kellogg, and that's in Proposal A. And then in other proposals, it remains Spanish, Spanish CLI remains at Kellogg. So I think those are some of the things that we were hoping to see where people land on its importance. And clearly the question is stating that the change into and out of a particular school, for Kellogg in particular, so quickly is of concern.
Thank you, Margaret. Okay. The last question I see in front of me is PPS worried that creating whole school DLI, dual language schools, will be segregating? Right now, isn't it true that having schools set up with half DLI, half neighborhood tends to integrate and have a more diverse environment? Do we want to segregate the DLI communities?
So there is creating a whole school DLI program is not equivalent to segregating communities, because the whole school DLI program still admits students regardless of race, creed, background, ethnicity, what have you. So it is actually a healthier environment to integrate, because you have all cultures under the same roof around that same DLI language access. So there is no intention to segregate, and we do not think that it will segregate students. Is there a part 2 to that question, Karina?
No, it was, I believe the question was all set up around, the idea around segregation. Yeah.
Okay.
Those are the only questions that have been fed to me. I understand that there are a significant number of questions that were not able to be addressed this evening directly, 431 or 431 questions total. So again, we will be sharing all of the questions, the Q&A with the public, and certainly with the Southeast Guiding Coalition. And really the idea is to then be able to use that information to refine the plans moving forward. Okay. Maybe, Marnie, will you take us back so we can talk about Shanice went into the engagement pieces a little bit in her response, but maybe we can finish this out and then allow the close.
Absolutely. And so, as mentioned earlier, there are 3 levels of ways that we are gathering feedback from community. And the open house tonight is one key place, but we're also gathering feedback from our school communities across Southeast Portland, and throughout these engagement sessions represented throughout the first couple of weeks of December. And so we are able to reach folks from our impacted communities to be able to lift up their voices in this particular process. And we'll be able to have multilingual spaces and spaces for students to be able to share their priorities as well. And at pps.net/enrollment balancing, you may find more information about how to stay connected with us and updates on what we've learned from the process will be shared there as a result as well.
Thank you.
Pass it back to Karina to close.
Yeah. Marnie, if you'll pull up the last slide. Well, we just want to thank you on behalf of the school district. I want to thank you for joining us tonight, for giving us your questions. We understand these decisions are felt very deeply, right, within the community. And so want to provide as much information to you as possible. So as you see here, a lot of these resources, or all of these resources, are actually available on the Enrollment and Program Balancing website. Will maybe Marnie or will Natasha put that, because you should be able to send a chat to everyone, Natasha. Will you put the link to that website, to the PPS Enrollment and Program Balancing website in the public chat so people can have access to that, please? And so there you'll see the program level statistics across the proposal and against the 2021-22 baseline. That's called the scenario dashboard. Thank you, Natasha. And then also review the baseline dashboard in that same part of the website. And lastly, you can see map books that can be accessed at the bottom of those dashboard or via the website that Natasha just put in the link. So you can see the materials sidebar, and that should be available to you. Again, those should be fully translated on that website. So we hope that that provides you the information that you need. So thank you again for being here this evening. We will continue to work with the Southeast Guiding Coalition. We will present to them not only the input that we heard tonight, but also the input that has been coming in from principals as they've been having their meetings and any of the affinity-based focus groups. I don't know if anyone, I don't know, Claire, if you wanted to close or say your thank you on behalf of the school district, but I think that's it for the official agenda.
We thank you all so much for participating tonight, and we will share all of this with our Southeast Guiding Coalition members, and thank you for being here and participating.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.